When you play the Game of Thrones, you
subscribe and like,
or you die. There is no middle ground.
Alright, hello YouTube, welcome back to the Grease Goblin YouTube channel. In today's video, we are going to be talking about how does George R.R. Martin get us to really be involved in these characters and really be invested in them. So when we do have these big payoff moments, why we care so much. When we get things like the Red Wedding, when we get to things like Ned's death, when we get to, for instance, Tyrion's trial and all of that in Storm of Swords, why are we so invested as we are? Why has this community been able to keep going for years and years, even after the main series has really not continued because we haven't gotten wins in so many years? But that is kind of the point of the video, and I want to really explore the first book and how George builds characters, how he builds a younger character specifically, like Jon, like Dany, like Robb, for instance, and like Arya and Sansa. Those are like our 5 main characters that are being built up in the first book. Yes, we have other characters like Tyrion, Ned, and Catelyn who are more of our adult characters. They don't have as much character building exactly when it comes to them developing throughout the entire book, because again, they're adults. You don't change as much, I feel like, when you're an adult, when you are, like, say, a teenager getting into, you know, trying to be an adult. So for this video, we're specifically going to talk about, I think, those 5 characters and how they're portrayed in the first book. But before we get into the video, if you guys would like to subscribe, like, and comment, please do. It helps the channel grow, reach people that might like this content as well. And also, if any of you picked up on, I just took my headphones off because I had them on for literally no reason. Sometimes I'm just dumb. But, so let's get into a Game of Thrones and really talk about how George establishes these characters, which gets us so invested in their stories. And it's something that I want to compare to a lot of other mediums and movies, TV shows, just other universes in a whole, and how they don't do this correctly. Let's look at, for instance, Dany, who I think this is probably her strongest book. I think the first book for me is my favorite Dany book, and there's a lot of reasons for that. She's a character that is very easy to relate with, especially if you're a young woman, or you can relate to how you felt as probably a woman would growing up and the way Dany has to get through things. Now, Dany's circumstances are much different than like a real world situation where Dany is forced into a marriage. Now, again, I know that happens in, you know, other countries, but for instance, like the United States where I live, it's not really as much. And how Dany is only, you know, 13, 14 when, you know, she starts basically having sex and all these other things. Dany is this character that starts out very timid. She is a person that doesn't stand up for herself. She doesn't have much courage. She doesn't have a lot of self-confidence. And by the end of the book, and it's not like it's like one event shifts it all the way to where she's not a confident character. She's the mother of dragons. She's the Khaleesi. She's a character that has mini arcs throughout the entire book. Because I think your first mini arc, and I've been doing this on my review, which is kind of why I wanted to do this video, and this is also going to be kind of like a series of videos now that I want to talk about how George R.R. Martin does certain elements of A Song of Ice and Fire that make it so great. And this is kind of a part 2 off of the revenge video I did, I think, 2 weeks ago at this point. So, if we look at Dany's first little mini arc, she starts off being this person that, again, is very scared. She doesn't really stand up to her brother. She's abused. A lot of things going on with Dany. In that chapter, she doesn't do much to stand up for herself. In Dany 2, she starts to gain some confidence, right? She's going into this wedding, but she's still very scared of what's going to come after with, you know, the sex, what's going to happen with Drogo and how that goes on. And even by the end of that chapter, it's her kind of gaining her confidence a bit. And then we get to Dany 3, and it's where she's this character that has adapted to being with the Dothraki culture. She's a person that has grown in confidence. She is someone that understands her role and what power she has. But at the same time, right, she's able to stand up to her bullies, her brother. But at the same time, she's still scared. She still has some of that trauma of Viserys is going to hurt me. That is a specific thing that's in Dany 3. And I think it makes Dany such a great character, especially early on. We're focusing a lot more on Dany and who she is as a person, and her personal growth is very intriguing to me. And it's one of the reasons I love her character so much, because by the time we get to the end of it, right, she's this character that is much more sure of herself. And yes, she makes bad decisions along the way. She doesn't trust the right people, and that's another part of Dany's character arc, right? Her trusting people. That's something that's going to continue throughout the entire series. And she comes to this moment where she has to believe that she is a dragon, that she can either awake the dragons or she can do something, burning in the funeral pyre with her husband and her child. It's a very powerful arc for me, for Dany 1, and it makes her a character that we sympathize with. She's a character that we can understand her motives, where she came up from. We understand her flaws and also what she succeeds in. She's a great conqueror, as we're going to find out. She's very actually able to manipulate pretty well people. She's able to manipulate certain people actually kind of well. She plays on this idea that she is a young child and knows nothing on this, that, or whatever. Again, that's a manipulation tactic Dany uses, and she's actually very effective in it. So Dany is one example of how George does this really, really well. And it's, again, one of the reasons she's a fan favorite character. And I think she's really an inspirational character for a lot of younger women and women just as a whole. And I think that's a great character to start with. Now, another character who is very similar to Dany is Jon. Jon is a character that, yes, has a very different circumstance than Dany, but at the same time, they're very similar character arcs. Jon is this character that we started out, and he is someone that is kind of living in privilege, right? He is upper class. Even though he is a bastard, he's still upper class. It's kind of like the idea of Tyrion. It's just Tyrion probably has it slightly better than Jon, albeit not by much. And Jon is this character that starts out being a character that really feels alone, where he doesn't really know what his place is. He doesn't know who he is supposed to be. He doesn't know where he fits into this world, and that's something I really resonate with. And something I forgot to mention with Dany that I really wanted to talk about that makes Dany so compelling for me is I was someone, when I was getting into high school, or for people that, don't have like high school or the American system, more or less when I was becoming, a teenager, I was someone that I wasn't really an outspoken person. I wasn't someone that really stood up for myself that often. And Dany is someone that I can relate with a lot in the way she starts as a character. But getting back to Jon doesn't really seem like he has that problem. Jon stands up to people. He stands up to kind of his bullies. Outside of Catelyn, Jon is someone that is very afraid of Catelyn. Now, he does kind of stand up to her in their last meeting. But again, still Jon has that fear. And it's something he doesn't really get to have another situation like, say, Dany does with Viserys. But you have to think Jon meeting Catelyn, say if he does meet Lady Stoneheart in the future, that'll be a way different dynamic, in my opinion, off of what Jon has experienced. But getting into Jon, he's this character that he doesn't feel like he has a place. And he goes to the Wall. And a really interesting idea, I think, that I relate to a lot is something I struggled with early on in my life was people that are different than you. And Jon struggles with that exactly. He goes to the Wall, and you have a lot of people that are more middle class, or usually actually lower class, that are not good fighters. These are people that have had to survive off of stealing, or maybe they would starve. People that maybe even picked the wrong side of, say, wars. Like, there's a couple of people there that, just fought on the wrong side in Robert's Rebellion. And Jon looks down on these people. He specifically thinks that he looks down on these people, and he's disgusted by them. And that is something that when I was growing up, was very religious, and it was difficult for me. And I wouldn't go as far as just like saying like what Jon was saying, but it was a weird dynamic where, it's hard to, when you're younger, for people to be different to you, don't have the same religious beliefs and things like that. And that's something as like I got older, I came to accept everybody has their own like path and why they believe in certain things, and the way you're brought up really shapes the way you kind of are as a person. And Jon, I think, is the perfect representation of that as he learns and deals with that. And also, Jon is someone that starts to not really value people like mocking him, for instance, which is something that I've also like tried to learn. That's something that's really inspirational, and how Jon deals with all of that. And what we come to is this character in Jon that's very sympathetic. He is a character that, yes, is mistreated. Catelyn mistreats him, we would assume. I know people have tried to kind of argue with me on that, but I think it's fairly obvious that Catelyn did, to some degree, mistreat Jon whenever she kind of had the opportunity, or at least neglected him completely. And I don't exactly necessarily blame Catelyn for not liking Jon, but it's the way Catelyn goes about treating Jon where she could just try and just be nice in face value and not like Jon, instead of just being completely awful to him all of the time. It would appear. And to me, the way Jon goes through as a character, where he has to come to this major theme: does he stay and value his oath with the Night's Watch, or does he value his family? So it becomes more of a duty, love type thing, right? Where you have the love of your family, your father, Ned, or presumably father, and then also your oath, your duty, your loyalty to the Night's Watch. And you also have a loyalty situation of your family and also the Night's Watch just pulling on you. And that's very interesting dynamic. And by the end of the story, Jon has come to the idea where he is going to stay loyal to the Night's Watch, and that's something that's going to define him, and that's something he's going to have to think about for the rest of his life, and maybe regret that decision. And that's a really great character arc for Jon, and it makes him a very compelling character as he comes to kind of adulthood, as he kind of grows out of being a child. And all of these characters I'm going to talk about are all characters that they think they're adults way before they need to be, right? Dany is only 14 and she's pregnant, and in that Dany 3 chapter, Jorah says she is a child. Again, she is. She's 13, 14 years old. And Dany says, I am no child anymore. It shows, one, how fast people have to grow up in this world, but also, two, some of these people just are not accepting that they are not, like, still a child. And that's something we all do, right? When you're 15, 16 years old, you're either just starting to drive or whatever, you start thinking, oh, I'm an adult now. And in reality, you're just not. I mean, there's just not, you haven't had enough time to experience life and learn things to help you. And I'm 23 years old, and I'm still someone that's growing, and I don't know everything. And I'm trying to get better at that. Trying to be, trying to just live life to the fullest, I guess. And all of that. So that kind of gets us to the next character. Now, you guys might be surprised that I didn't put Bran on here. And the reason I didn't really put Bran on here is because Bran does not have, in my opinion, a clear character arc in book 1. And his role mainly, especially early on in the series, is to kind of get the plot going. Like, Bran 2 is a chapter that is really about kickstarting the Lannister-Stark rivalry and that entire plot that's going to basically be Catelyn's. She basically takes that plot. So that really isn't a Bran chapter, and all of it really establishes is Bran is a good climber, he's adventurous. Bran 1 is much more about establishing other people. Robb, Ned, Jon, and those three, and how they, and their dynamic between the three of them. Bran 3 is, again, a dream. It's not a lot of building on Bran. It's kind of foreshadowing the things that are going to happen way down the line, and also be a building block for why he has, say, visions or dreams later on in the books or whatever. So, why I'm saying all this is because Bran is kind of our look into Robb for a good portion of the first book. When we get to Bran 4 is a lot about showing who Robb has become. And also, a little bit is also about building a Bran up a bit more. But it shows that Robb is this character that, because his mother is left, because his father is left, he is this character now that has to take on the role of the Lord of Winterfell. He has a lot to live up to. He's a character that, at the beginning of the story, he's still very much a kid, right? He is someone that's racing Jon. He's bringing out his sword. He's doing this one theme that I've mentioned over and over again with A Song of Ice and Fire, is that people that are immature and still very young tend to draw out their swords and threaten using their swords when it's not necessary, when it's not going to happen. Nothing is going to happen. And Robb is no exception to that. He is someone that, again, shows that. And as we see Robb go on, and especially into this book, he's now being called to lead the forces of the North, handle all of these different personalities and the struggles of doing that, going south, and by the end, I mean, becoming King of the North within the first book. Robb goes on this really tremendous arc of becoming this great commander with the Blackfish, and someone that has to negotiate with all of these different people on honors, and he has a lot to live up to with his father, and we see how that weighs on him heavily, thinking about how Ned would have done Robb's position, and how Ned would think of Robb at this point. There's a lot going on there within Robb, and that only gets more apparent as we go on Robb is a character that doesn't have, I don't think, as strong of an arc as, say, Jon and Dany, because we're specifically in their minds. But he's a character that really goes on a really awesome transformation within this first book. Now, moving on to kind of our King's Landing characters, and Arya and Sansa specifically, the two, yes, are vastly different characters, but they both kind of start to grow up in this first book. And Sansa is this character that she starts off really believing in all of these fairy tales, that all of these gallant knights, that there's nothing dishonorable going on, that everything is a fairy tale. She's a character that kind of avoids the truth for a long time. She's someone that she sees red flags and decides to ignore them. She is someone that does not take accountability or any of that on her. And something specifically we see with is how Sansa and Arya react to Micah and also Lady's death. Where Arya is someone that is extremely angry. She is someone that feels a lot of guilt towards what happened. Sansa, from what we know, again, based on Arya's POV, right? Because we're not in Sansa's head directly after that event. We're only told from Arya's point of view. And Sansa tells Arya that it is her fault. She shifts all of the blame from herself onto Arya. And again, I think Sansa is feeling guilt. She is feeling sadness and anger, but she's putting all of that and blaming it on Arya. And that's an interesting character dynamic that we see early on with Sansa. And as the story goes forward and Ned dies and her gallant prince is the one to do it, we see Sansa's world kind of turn upside down, and she becomes this prisoner of war type character that's married or betrothed to a monster. It's a very interesting character arc because Sansa is inherently a character that you're not really supposed to like early on. She's just not a character. We don't see a lot through Sansa's eyes. You know, we get one chapter early on and don't really see her for a little while. And then we're supposed to not like her. And then this has been my focus of the reread, is looking at Sansa as a character. She's a very interesting character in the way George writes her. And it's interesting because you look at Arya, who is the exact opposite. Arya is someone that hates herself more than anyone after the events at the Trident. She is someone that takes full accountability, and probably more accountability than she needs to. She is someone that understands what her actions do. She is someone that doesn't buy into the fairy tale. She sees what these characters are. She sees what Joffrey is. She sees what the Hound is, what the Lannisters are. She's not really ignoring that. And she's a character that's much more resourceful. Her survivability is just way higher than Sansa's for now, because she understands and she's a little bit more street smart than Sansa is. And I think it's very compelling the way Arya kind of goes from that character, where in the beginning, she's kind of this character that feels really alone. And that's something that she's going to have to deal with as the story goes on. And she's someone that kind of takes for granted what she had. Arya is a character that felt alone even when she had her father, her mother, all of these people in Winterfell. She goes to King's Landing, and that only amplifies. And she thinks about Winterfell and remembers it and really wishes that she had been back. She's a character that I think so many of us can relate to, because she's a character that feels regret. She feels remorse. Like, she took things for granted, and that's something I think that a lot of us can relate to, whether that's a family member or a friend that's passed on, that, you know, you'd wish you'd spent more time with them, or you just had wished you had done more. Arya is a character you can really feel that with, especially as you go forward in the story. And Arya is this character that has been on this massive arc, because she's on an arc of vengeance, more or less, is what she's on, where she wants revenge. She has her names. That's something that's going to transform her as a character, and how that is going to transpire and wins. I have theory crafted, you know, maybe that's going to lead her to meeting up with Lady Stoneheart, and you put really the two characters with the most motivations for revenge together. That could be interesting, how one could impact the other. And A Game of Thrones is really a perfect book when it comes to build a building block for all of our younger characters. And that's really what I wanted to talk about in this video, because George does a fantastic job of doing that aspect of the story. So yeah, let me know what you guys think, and if you guys have any more video suggestions on topics when it comes to what George R. R. Martin has been able to craft so well on A Song of Ice and Fire, let me know, and I will see you guys all in the next video. Bye, guys.